Welcome to Mystery Conversations, a Bell Cow podcast. I'm Rob Young.
And I'm Michael McBride. We're the people behind Bell Cow Productions.
We're bringing you an encore recording of Minnesota Mystery Night, a live monthly author event held the third Monday of each month at Lucky's 13 in Mendota, Minnesota.
Now just kick back and enjoy.
About 4 years ago, 5 Minnesota thriller authors, Brian Luderman, John Baird Rogers, Julie Holmes, Chris Norbury, and myself got together and formed Midwest Mystery Works. Out of this group came the idea, put forth originally by Brian, to collaborate on a book, with each of us taking a character from our individual books and combining them to solve a crime. From this collaboration came the Kill Code Collective, a medical thriller set in Minnesota. As the driving force and chief cat wrangler behind this book, Brian, I now turn this introduction over to you.
What I'm going to do is ask everybody to briefly introduce themselves and their character, and then to describe how their character got involved in the story, how they became part of the collective. So, and we'll do it in the order in which their characters appear in the story. So, Julie, you want to start?
I'm Julie Holmes, and I write the Sierra Bauer mysteries. Sierra Bauer is an aircraft mechanic. I am a recovering aircraft mechanic. So I've done the work. I've done the job. She's a much better mechanic than I ever was. But Sierra and her partner, Quinn, in the beginning of the book, Sierra is waiting to get on the plane because the pilots wrote something up, and that's what you do. You wait till everybody's off the plane, and then you go talk to the pilots. Well, as the last passengers are getting off, one collapses. And she rushes over, because she's right there. She rushes over to see if she can help and finds out it's a family friend. And she dies. And that kicks off the whole what on earth happened. Because what she learns is that the family friend had just had a checkup. Nothing was wrong. Everything was fine. And now all of a sudden, something happened. And she had an implantable device. And something happened and she died. And her daughter is really concerned. And so she asks Sierra and Quinn for help, trying to figure out what happened.
Okay, Chris.
Okay. I'm Chris Norbury, and my signature character, and I take that back. It is my signature thriller character, is Matt Lanier. He is a professional musician, a world-class professional musician, kind of like Julie. He's the musician I wish I could have been, because that's my original career. He is a bass player, classical and jazz, and my series starts off, he is a successful musician, divorced a while ago from his wife, playing bass with the Minnesota Orchestra, and he also has a jazz trio that has toured around. When he was a young musician, he traveled the world and played with jazz ensembles and things like that. So in my series, he discovers a conspiracy that nobody else can figure out. And one way I describe Matt is that he is brilliantly stubborn, and he has an integrity level that's off the charts. So when his old elderly neighbor, whose husband has died mysteriously, asks him for help to find out why they're calling his death a suicide instead of a heart attack, because she knows he wouldn't commit suicide, he starts to investigate. He finds out that there's a conspiracy. They're trying to steal farmland along Interstate 35 for some strange reason. And because his loyalty and his love for this woman, who was his surrogate mother after his mother died, is so high, he's going to find out what happened no matter what. And no matter what really happens big time. So by the end of the third book in the series, he has finally, I won't say conquered, but has survived. The conspiracy has been stopped, but he's got PTSD. He's been tried to be killed, I think 7 different times I counted, run over, blown up, shot at many times, and survived all that. But he's had to kill people to survive. It was always in self-defense, because he's not a violent guy. But talk about my whole premise was take a normal guy who's successful, relatively happy, ruin his life in the first book, and see what happens. So when he comes into the Kill Code Collective, he is a damaged person. He's got emotional trauma, PTSD, physical trauma. He was injured. He's rehabbing his hand. He gets back into this kind of a celebratory retirement orchestra with his college professor who runs the music department, who's retiring. They're going to have this one big final concert. The maestro, Dr. Danielson, Magnus Danielson, strides to the podium, accepts the applause, steps up, and then keels over. And Matt's in the bass section, and he's the one who's known him the best and the longest. He sprints to his side, and Dr. Dan, as we call him, is gasping his last breath. And he finds out afterwards that he died, but he had this implantable cardiac device. Coincidence? And then he's okay with that until the son calls a little bit later and says somebody was sending him death threats in emails, and can you find this guy? I want to beat the crap out of him. And Matt says, no, I'll check, I'll investigate, see what I can find. But now he feels obligated because this was his college mentor, the man who inspired him to become a professional musician. So he feels he owes it to the family. He's loyal to a fault. He's stubborn to a fault. And he starts digging around and finds out, this implantable cardiac device should have been fine, but he died for no apparent reason, so he's going to try and dig. And that's his intro into the story.
Okay, John?
So those first two characters probably accomplish a great deal of the physical action in the book, but there's a lot going on behind the physical action. My character comes from my series. Her name is Louise Napolitani, and she's from North Boston, and she's 21 years old. She graduated from MIT with a master's in operations research at 18. And she's about 5'8" and very slender. Somebody in the book says she looks like a runway model down on her luck. Because if she attends a meeting, she might be wearing a crimson T-shirt that says Harvard sucks, and a pair of shorts and green socks and some scuffed Nikes, because she doesn't care a lot about the modeling world and looking right. But if you want to talk to her about nonlinear algebra or statistics, then you've got a person who's very interested. She gets hired because there is a leak in a supposedly absolutely safe database. And so here she is, a person with limited social abilities, and she's doing this analysis, and fortunately she runs into a somewhat older woman who is very sharp and who knows an awful lot more about the world than she does, and that woman kind of becomes a mentor for her while they both try to figure out what in the hell's going on. And that woman is
Penn
Wilkerson.
My character is Penn. She's the subject of 6 books that I've written. She is lamentably an attorney, but no, nobody's perfect. She actually works more as an investigator in recent years, and so she is hired, as is Wheezy, by the medical device company whose devices are going nuts, Voyager Cardiac Systems. And Penn, I should mention, is a paraplegic as a result of a car accident. She's in a wheelchair. She is extremely smart. She's extremely feisty. She discovers as, now, you know, it was interesting having her interact with the other characters. The other characters let it be known that Penn was also a little bossy, in addition to being very organized and competent. And they also believe, and I think it's true, that Penn was a little ethically flexible, maybe more than some of the other. And among the things she did was show a willingness to work with a very slippery character named
Henry Hawk is the kind of character that will follow you into a revolving door
Yes.
and then greet you when you come out the other side. Henry, let me give you a little backstory first, because we may have left this up in the air and not quite explained how this all fits together. We have the deaths of the two people that start the book, but the problem really revolves around the fact that the cardiac device manufacturer, Voyager, is covering up a known defect. And one of the people that helped develop the device lost his wife because the device failed. He is now no longer working for Voyager, but he is blackmailing, or trying to blackmail, the CEO of Voyager, a guy named Stephen Hartsburg. Hartsburg is a rather nefarious character. In addition to being CEO of this medical device company, he is also toying with the idea of divorcing his wife, and consequently is hiding money offshore so that he doesn't have to declare it in his divorce when he ultimately divorces and then allegedly will remarry his current courtesan. Henry Hawk is really good at parking money offshore, among other things. So he has known Hartsburg when all this happens because he managed to move $15 million of Hartsburg's money into offshore accounts. That's backstory. Hartsburg now contacts Hawk to try to help him raise $30 million to pay the ransom that this blackmailer wants. That's how Hawk becomes involved. He is involved in the financial end of this transaction, and only because he is afraid. Oh, and by the way, he's going to pick up a $3 million fee on this. He meets these other characters only because he's afraid that they're going to screw up the works and make sure this deal doesn't happen. Henry is the kind of guy that if he was sitting here, he'd be swinging his legs because he's about 5'1" in all directions. He also is a superb dancer, and he lives in Barcelona and regularly dances at the Moog, which is one of the great dance clubs in Europe, where he, being rather wealthy, is known for gracing his dance partners with lavish gifts. So you get an idea that Mr. Hawk is rather slick in all his behavior. Julie's character appears first, so she wrote the beginning of the book. I just want you to read the first paragraph.
All right, this is the opening. Who the hell wears 5-inch heels in snow? Minneapolis in winter was not the time to wear fancy heels outside, snow or no snow. That was just asking for frostbitten feet. Sierra Bauer, aircraft mechanic, squinted against the falling snow and waited for the passengers to deplane. The pilots had called in a problem, nothing major, but she needed to talk with them. The woman wearing said 5-inch heels and a long red woolen coat held up the line of passengers as she made her way down the air stair of the Range Airlines de Havilland Dash 8 turboprop. A man behind her moved to her side as she wobbled on the slick, boot-flattened snow and offered his arm, which she accepted. Fat white snowflakes dusted the man's slick, dark-haired. Sierra shook her head. Yet another idiot, thinking they can come to Minnesota in January, the dead of winter, and not wear a hat.
You have now met the Bond villain. What did you guys think when this was first proposed?
Why did I ever get asked to be in this group? This is the last thing I want to do. I'm not a joiner, I'm a loner, but I wanted to be polite.
You thought it was fun.
Well, I wanted to be polite, and so I went along with the group. But here we are. I never thought we'd get this far. Honest to God, I thought we'd give it a shot and maybe write a first draft and go, what were we thinking? Oh my God, let's go back to our regular jobs. Amazingly, it worked out. I mean, we are publishing a book, and the early advanced reviews are not so bad. So it's like, I think it's a darn good read.
Well, I did propose this idea, and I was kind of surprised when everybody jumped on it enthusiastically and said, yes, let's do it. Even Chris, yeah, he'll tell you now. Well,
relatively enthusiastic.
He needs to bellyache about something, but everybody stayed with it the whole way through. We really had a lot of fun doing it. So we had to integrate the efforts of 5 people to do this. You may be asking, was that difficult? The answer is, why, yes, it was. So I spent the better part of 2 years kind of up to my ears in spreadsheets, timelines, notes, outlines, everything else, trying to fit everything together. The first drafts were written by individual people, but after they were gone over by everybody else, we kept a copy online, and everybody could go on and propose changes and make comments and think about the next section. After we did that, each section became not identifiable. It's pretty seamless. You really can't tell who wrote what because no one person wrote any of the remaining segments. And so putting that all together was the trick. And we really had fun doing it. We'd have Zoom meetings, I don't know, every 3 or 4 weeks, I suppose. And my wife would say, "What's all that laughter I hear coming out of your den?" You guys are really having fun doing this.
That was tears.
I was asked by Marianne Grossman, said, "Well, was there a time when you had to, really wrangle the cats to step in and, impose a solution or people couldn't disagree?" Well, I'll tell you about the most significant disagreement we had through the whole process. And this is one, if your delicate ears can handle a couple of barnyard profanities on the radio, they might have to bleep it, but
Louis will take care of the editing.
Yeah. You guys know which one I'm talking about. We had a group scene where all the first scene where all 5 of our characters are in the room discussing where do we go from here, what's the plan. Well, only 4 of the characters are there, and then Henri Hawk walks in, and everyone's, "Who is this guy?" and gives this dog and pony show explaining why they shouldn't do anything, why they should let this extortion scheme go ahead and so on. And he's very smooth.
I beg your pardon.
And so then he leaves, and somebody says, "What was that?" And Penn said, "That was a steaming pile of horseshit." and anyway, we're going over the text for that section, and Chris says, no, that's wrong. I think it should be bullshit. And that set off the argument. For the next week and a half, we're going back and forth. Everybody had a different opinion on which type of animal excrement accurately described Hawk's presentation. Do we want bovine or equine? And finally I said, enough. It's going to be the horse version. Even though I think back on it, I think Chris was probably right. But anyway.
My argument was that there's a lot more cows in Minnesota than there are horses, most likely. So
you see, very, how can you
write what you know?
With logic like that, how can you do? Anyway, so the rest of the group should have deferred to Rob and myself. I mean, presuming to lecture a couple of lawyers on the finer points of BS, I don't think so. You remember any other particular highlights or things that we had going that you want to talk about? Yeah, go ahead.
I do. The biggest controversy we had throughout this entire 2.5 years is what we were going to wear tonight.
That's right.
Because we have T-shirts that say Midwest Mystery Works. Yeah. And some of us said, we'll wear T-shirts and maybe a sport jacket. And, and then I think it was actually Julie with all her common sense.
Thank heavens
saying,
for Julie.
Yeah, no. So I think that was the biggest.
After dealing with us 4 bozos for 2.5 years, yeah, she was entitled to a little class in the operation. John, what did you think about? Why don't you describe what you had to do with your character in terms of the timeline?
Well, my character was a little different because, as I said, she was in her mid-30s when I started my series, and now all of a sudden she's 21. So think back on yourself at 35, comparing yourself to when you were 21. So I had to make that adjustment in my character. I think the whole process went pretty well, partly because we were lucky enough to have 5 people rather than, say, 2 or 3. I mean, if you have 2 or 3 people, you can really get to hate each other. But if you have 5 people, you kind of have to say, wait a minute, there's only so much time in the world. I cannot correct the other 4 people. So maybe I'd better just write my stuff and leave their stuff kind of alone. Of course, I did suggest that we use only recto printing for the book, and everybody pointed out to me that that was probably current in 1980. We did have small things.
Yeah.
We did, but Rob and I formed Mystery Works. We recruited people we thought would be easy to work with, and we really succeeded spectacularly. Everybody checked their egos at the door, and you really need
How did Chris
to do
get
that.
in?
Well, all right, so we weren't perfect in our
I'm still
selection
wondering
process.
that question.
But,
I'll second that on checking the egos at the door. And one thing I was thinking about all their books, because I've read all of them, I think virtually all of them, maybe I missed one of Brian's older ones, is that we all have protagonists who are quote-unquote amateur sleuths. So those are people who are non-professional crime fighters. We're not cops, we're not FBI agents, CIA, whatever. And so when you write a story like that, you have to learn how to make it plausible that your amateur sleuth is getting involved in this like mind conspiracy, Julie's murder, John's, high cyber hacking criminals, and Wheezy is a white hat hacker fighting the black hat hackers. And so you learn how to write your story believably so people say, oh, yeah, I can understand why that amateur person is in there solving this crime. So we all have that experience, and I think that helped us a lot making all of our characters mesh together and fight this crime in this non-professional way, so to speak. We did bring in the cops at the very end when we wanted to lock people up and haul them off to jail, but 95% of the story is we're just winging it and kind of figuring out, working together. So I thought that was a really helpful thing too. And I did have one beef that was quickly corrected. The first version of the cover we got was not anything to my liking, because if you are familiar with Lee Child's character Jack Reacher, he's like the person I would love to be, just big and tough and mean and take no prisoners and everything. But the original silhouette of Matt was a guy who would have made Jack Reacher look more like Henri Hawk than a normal person. And I said, you got to take off about 100 pounds of him and about 6 inches and narrow those shoulders to normal size rather than the gigantic size. So I had a good laugh about that. But I said, please bring him back to scale. He's a normal, above average height, regular weight guy, nothing special. So we scaled him back. I had a good laugh about that when I first saw it. And I said, how did I impart that impression to readers or these guys or maybe the cover designer that he was this Superman? And he wasn't, but he has his own superpowers, but they have nothing to do with strength or height or size.
well, I think speaking for myself, and we will take some questions down the line. Speaking for myself, it was really a growth experience as a writer to do this. To begin with, we are all used to having our characters being the sole focal point of the book and the only real protagonist, and having to shift gears and make our characters one of just 5, that took some doing. And like I said, that took a little ego work. For my characters, it was interesting to see how the other characters reacted to my characters. Oh, is she really bossy? I guess she is. And, well, I knew she was, I said she was also ethically flexible. I knew that. And so she worked closely with Wheezy, who, as a hacker by definition, works in kind of a gray area quite often, too. And so that was an interesting thing. And another thing I had to do was, in 6 books, I had written Penn's character entirely in a first-person narration. And I had to switch and do it in a third-person narration. I mean, it wasn't terribly hard, but it was stretching a little bit, and I found that to be a great experience.
One thing that struck me, we all write same genre. We all write mystery. We understand there's a structure to mystery. We all understood the structure. We knew that there had to be the inciting incident. We knew that there had to be a pinch point. We all knew that every character had to have a reason to be there, to do something. I thought it was really neat that because we all understand that, when we were putting the outline together, we'd ask the question, well, why is that character there? Well, okay, so we got to create a reason, why would that character logically be there? Oh, okay. well, that makes sense. And we would do that through the whole process of creating the story. And I think that was one reason that we worked so well, is that we all understood story structure.
Yeah.
And we knew what parts our characters needed to play in order for everything to happen the way it needed to happen.
Amen.
I think we avoided a lot of boredom by having Hawk as one of the characters. There's never a dull moment with him. Rob had several characters that he could have, from his books, that who are private detectives, people who would be logical protagonists. But we all said which characters we'd want to use, and then Rob said, "Oh, I'm going to use Hawk." And that's when I was hooked on the book. I knew that was going to be fun because he's slippery, he switches sides, he's got schemes that would make Machiavelli blush. I mean, he's a great character.
We've chatted a bit about what we've done and all that, but there's at least a couple people in the audience who've written reviews on this book already. Tell us what you thought. You've read it, you know. David writes books in collaboration, so he had.
So can I ask a question first?
Sure.
I'm intensely interested about your outlining process.
What outlining process?
You didn't outline.
I think we had something that we could call an outline, but
I think it was more of a
buried in the
timeline.
emails.
It was more of a timeline, I
Yeah.
think. This happens and this happens.
That's
and
how
then
it
this
started.
happens and
This entire process, there's really no playbook for. We had to make it up as we go along. We had a vision to start with. For the first half of the book, we were going to have 5 separate stories, each featuring one of the characters. They would all make their entrance into the story as we described here, and they would all end up in the same place, arriving with the same name as the suspect they thought did this. And then the second half would be of the book, they would be all working together and trying to prove what was going on, and then discovering the other problems that had come with this, Gina Apate and so on. And we started out that way, and which I thought would have been more manageable than just everybody mix and match. And you can kind of see the remnants of that a little bit with the opening segments, but we quickly learned that the timelines didn't really work very well that way, that we had to stick in some more scenes to switch back to showing Gina Apate. We had to switch back to showing the company, the CEOs being blackmailed, and we had to intersperse that with these 5 stories. And finally it was, what the hell? We just we just kind of, I think segment by segment, we would go through and, okay, what happens next? We'd just brainstorm it, and for some segments of the second half, we actually split up into teams. We had Julie's character, Sierra, and Chris's character, Matt, work together for a good share of the second half, and John's character, Wheezy, and my character, Penn, also worked closely together. I thought one of the neat things, John, was the relationship between Penn and Wheezy. I thought that worked well. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, like I say, one of my challenges was bringing a 35-year-old person back to 21, particularly a person who had almost no patience with any sort of social nicety, to be dropped into this situation. And Penn is older. Penn is very streetwise, and Wheezy is absolutely unstreetwise. So there is an opportunity for humor. And no story, no matter how good a detective story it is really going to fly for people that just enjoy reading if there isn't some line of humor running through it. And so when you have Penn Wilkinson, very accomplished, very together, and Wheezy off in another world somewhere, there's an opportunity for humor. And that worked out really well, I thought.
It was a lot of fun. We should mention, too, that Julie had to use a time machine for her character as well. You want to describe that?
Oh, yeah. So my books are set in 1993, 94. And this book's set in now. So there was a real challenge in making sure that there were no references to age, because if we didn't take the time machine, it just would be really weird. And the other thing I wanted to make sure is there is not a solid indication of what the Quinn and Sierra's current relationship is, because they haven't gotten there yet in my books. So
That's right.
yeah, so it's kind of a spoiler sort of alert.
Well, David, you've taken a long time to answer our questions. So
I've successfully evaded you. So the thing I would say is that managing all those characters, I think, is a real feat, because you did have essentially 5+ main characters. So going in, I knew it was going to be 5 main characters, so I was intensely interested in how you were going to handle that. I think that you did it well. The second thing I noticed was that we knew who did it like halfway through the book. So the second half of the book, as Brian pointed out, turns into a manhunt, where they split up into teams, and one's going up north, and one's looking at the condo. I think it was in St. Paul or something. Yeah. So that was another interesting twist that I didn't see coming. So congratulations. Nice job, everyone.
Thanks.
thank you. Okay, should we go to questions? at this
Sure.
point? Okay, Steve?
I was just going to add on to what David said, actually. I think one of the challenges was, having 5 stars working together as, one, as a unit. But I think what I realized after it was all said and done, and I was kind of analyzing the characters, is that they all brought different skill sets and different strengths and weaknesses to the story. And I think combining them actually turned out to be more or less one main character. And I think that's why it worked, because Sierra was the technical side, Wheezy was the brilliant computer person, Penn was the educated lawyer, Matt was this emotional flywheel of a musician, Hawk was like the dark side of everybody. So combine those traits together, you get kind of one whole person. So we had a 5-part main character, and I think that's why the book worked fairly well, is that it wasn't 5 egos clashing, saying, "Oh, what about me? What about me? I want to get, I think we should do this," and all these fights. It was kind of like the writing process. Everybody is working together to solve these horrible crimes. Like, we got to stop thousands of people possibly from being killed by this thing because it's in the wrong hands. So that goes to your question of how we made those characters all work well in the story.
Before we get to Steve's question, I should just comment that the same principle also applied to the 5 of us in writing, that we brought different skills and experience to the process. For example, 2 of us, John and Julie, have some technical background, and so they did the bulk of the research in developing a plausible scenario for how medical devices could be tampered with or misused, and so that was useful to have. We have someone who seems to be suspiciously good at writing about financial manipulations, Rob. I mean, some of these schemes that he wrote up for Hawk, I mean, I'm thinking, I am too stupid to be a criminal. I mean, how on earth did he think of these things? But he did it nonetheless. Yeah. Okay.
Fifth Amendment. Any more questions?
There we go. Hey, Brian, as the cat wrangler, I'm curious, one thing that I could imagine you probably could all really disagree on is the title. I mean, you have 3 words. You could really focus on that and whether or not someone likes alliteration or not, or if it's too cute. How did that come about? Who got the title?
By default. I don't think anybody was just really jumped on this and said, yeah, that's it, let's do it. I think it was just, we went through probably dozens of titles, guys.
Dozens,
and this
easily.
is the one we could all agree on was pretty decent, and we just didn't like the other ones all that much. So we just generated tons of titles, and that's what we ended up with. Yeah.
Yes, a question about the business side. After the whole thing was written, Chris alluded to the cover, but did you all have different editors, publishers, audio people that you had to sort through and decide on, or was that?
Not really. We all have editors that we have used on our own projects. We decided, for convenience as much as anything, to use mine for this project. And she did a lot of stuff for us, generating the ebook files, the print book files, layout, and so on. It did a really nice job, I think. I think it has good production values. And I should mention, too, that I sent the manuscript to her, and it came back a couple of weeks later, and I'm reading through it, and I said, boy, there's not many comments on here. I wondered if I was missing something, so I went back and I said, well, Jennifer, this is pretty sparse here, and I'm thinking we've paid you this money, let's get our money's worth. But
a little bit.
And she said, well, it's just a really clean manuscript. What can I say? And I guess maybe you've got 5 experienced writers going through the same thing over and over again. We used a cover designer that Rob and I have used, and we both like this cover designer a lot. We think he did a great job on this one. Rob handled the legalities of the copyrights, and he's got a little company, the Hawk Hill Literary Publishing Company, and so he had the infrastructure to handle our finances for the deal. It really hasn't been a problem. It's been worked pretty smoothly most of the way through, I think.
I've kept Hawk away from the finances.
Yeah, thank you.
But we remember who wrote about all of those financial manipulations and everything. So,
I'll add that we all have good editors and cover designers, and we're willing to volunteer them for this. But let's just trust Brian and Bob. They know what they're doing, and we'll just let them pick the one, and it worked out fine. And my biggest temptation was, once we decided on the Kill Code Collective, was not to suggest, well, let's use all K's for the words just to make it kind of cute. It's like, no, probably not a good idea. So.
Would you recommend that 5 people who don't know each other as well as you all know each other try a collaboration like you've all worked together?
I wouldn't recommend that any 5 people try this. We finished up, we said, well, we got into it, and we said, I don't think anybody's really tried this before, and now I can tell you, now we know why. It's a pretty difficult project, but, we hope that people will read the book because it's a good book, not because of the technical feat that we pulled off and putting together. It's just a good book. And
the unique thing about ours, and I did a little bit of research too, and there's been a few collaborations. I found one that had 13 authors, another one had 26 authors, another one had 48 authors. It's like, okay. But the unique thing about ours is that we took each of our own characters and put them together. A lot of those other books were, the character was created for that book. The whole story, it's just that book. Whereas we took each of our characters and we put them together. And that's probably the most unique part of this.
Because that was the whole plan, is to introduce all of our fans to 4 other characters and 4 other authors to kind of cross-market. So that was the original reason we started this.
I was wondering, you haven't spoke much about how you meshed your characters together in scenes, as in, did one person write the scene with another person's character, and then you handed the memory stick or whatever it is you're doing to the other person, and they looked it over, no, my character would say this or that, or act this way, I'm going to tweak this, or how did you manage the scenes with each other's characters?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
For me and Julie, who wrote several chapters together, it was like, you write this one, I'll write this one, we'll compare notes, and then you'd get back the feedback. Well, she would say this, or he would do this, but very, very minor actually, because we know all these characters from reading the books, so we kind of have an idea going in that, okay, Matt would act like this, Sierra would do this, et cetera, et cetera. So that was pretty easy. Actually, I was surprised that it was relatively easy.
Well, and like Chris said, we read each other's books. We know the characters, and so we'd have a pretty good idea of what the other person's character would do in a situation. And Chris would write some scenes, and I'd go through them, and it's like, okay. And then I would write a scene, and he would go through it. And I think that's the same with John and Brian. Yep. Did the same thing. And then Brian, you wrote a couple of scenes with multiple of our characters.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I wrote the first, and again, when we say we wrote this, that it means we're writing the first draft. By the time we get through it, that it's pretty much written by everybody. Yeah. But I wrote the first draft of the 2 group scenes that we have with all of the characters, and that was a challenge. how do you avoid head hopping with 5 characters? You're the omniscient narrator, which you don't see very often. But for me, Kathy, it was illuminating, to see how does somebody else write my character? How do they see her? And John and I did some of that back and forth. It was fun. Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to reading this. And from what you've said, you didn't have many conflicts between yourselves as this went through. But because you each have very strong characters in your books, did your characters fight?
Yes.
Well,
Chris's character fought with everybody.
Yeah, he was looking for action. He was, like I say, he was very emotionally on the edge, and there was a couple of little asides that he and thoughts he had when he and Sierra are chatting by phone. They're staking out this house and having a little fun with her, but he kind of restrained himself in the interest of stopping the bad guys. But yeah, it was. There was no real fighting between characters.
Sierra would have shut him down.
Well, I know. He figured that out real quick. Plus, Quinn's
Quinn.
her partner. He's a cop, so you don't mess with someone who's got a cop for her best buddy. So.
Well, yeah, but the group kind of thought Quinn was a wuss, to be honest. He was really. He had this really annoying insistence on following the law, and a reluctance to pull out his gun and start shooting people, which irritated Matt as well.
Okay, Julie, this one's for you. Being that you're the only woman in the group, tell us a little bit how it was to work with 4 males.
She's asking what it was like for me to work with these 4 yahoos, since I'm the only female on the team. Honestly, because we're all authors, we're all professionals, it really wasn't that difficult to work with them. And also, I was an aircraft mechanic. I've worked in male-dominated fields for almost my entire career life. So, from aviation maintenance to IT, I'm a tech writer now, so that's more balanced. But yeah, it wasn't. We're all authors, and so in fact there was a circumstance where Brian mentioned something in some of the stuff I was writing and some of the scenes, and I was like, I don't see that. So can you explain to me what you're seeing? Explain to me what you're describing. And he explained it to me. It's like, oh, I never thought about that. But it was something that he was sensitive to that I had no clue. Mm-hmm. And that might have been because age.
Yes. You are.
Ouch!
You are the junior member of the group. That's by far.
I've got to say we were relieved when Julie agreed to join the Mystery Works. Otherwise we might as well have just called ourselves the old guys,
But she's not the token female by far.
No.
She holds her weight in them somehow. Honest to God.
Amen.
That's just because she put Matt in his place.
Well, but.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a current appearance schedule for the Kill Cold Collective? And if so, how can we find that schedule?
We do.
Yes.
It'll be on the Midwest Mystery Works website, in fact, or a Facebook page rather. It's on there. It is on. I think it'll be at least some of our individual websites. I'll put it on mine, and our next 2 appearances. We've got 2 more coming up this week. We're going to be in Delano on Thursday, and on Saturday we're going to be at Once Upon a Crime in Minneapolis, everybody's favorite bookstore. Hope some of you might stop by there. And we've got other things scheduled throughout the summer and the fall, actually, and a couple of book festivals, bookstore signings. Rob, am I missing anything?
We're going to be in Austin, Minnesota at Sweet Reads Books on a week from Saturday.
Saturday, May 30th.
Saturday, May 30th. Mm-hmm. Just
check the Facebook page for Midwest Mystery Works, or check any of the Facebook or the websites that we have for any of the authors.
Yeah.
You will find the schedules on there.
Yeah. I just published a blog post yesterday with the specific Kill Code Collective, our group, appearances, and then also on my full schedule, I mentioned all of the Kill Code special appearances. So you can find it just between all 5 of our sites. We got you covered. But we're going to be out there pretty busily this year.
We've got another question. We're just going to take a couple more. Don't get up and run away, because these books are available for purchase tonight.
So this sounds like quite the feat. I'm curious if any of you walked away from this process with like a new version of yourself, like learning something about yourself as a writer. You're all seasoned writers, but working with 4 other established writers. Did you learn anything about yourself, or did you learn anything about your characters, or did this process spark any new ideas about where your character might go next in your series or your next book?
It restored my faith in humanity. No, it was really an eye-opener that 5 people could work together on one project for 2.5 years and make it work. As far as we're concerned, we've succeeded because we got the darn thing published. Little side note on that, there's always a point in an author's writing the book where you get to the point where you go, I just don't know if this is good, whatever. And we were kind of struggling about halfway through, and I decided I'm just going to read this thing, a really rough first draft, start to finish, and see. And I'm reading it on Google Docs and reading. I go, okay, good. I finished it, and I told the guys at the next meeting, said, this is a good story. It is well constructed. The characters are interesting. It's going to work. So it was kind of like, to me, I felt like refreshed and re-energized that, okay, we can get this over the finish line, because when we started, we were just fumbling our way trying to figure out, well, where do we go with this? The plot, the characters, how is this going to work? And then when we got that part, it's like, okay, this can work, and we got it going. And so that was really, kind of, like I said, that's when I really bought into the premise and the project. It was like, okay, we can get there.
I want to give Brian a lot of credit, though, for keeping us on the rails.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he did, he put together the timeline. Okay, this is what we're going to do after we had all discussed it and brainstormed and all this other stuff. So we had a plan. We had a blueprint. And anytime there was a disagreement, I mean, one person says this, it should say this, and then somebody else says it should say that, and if we couldn't agree, then Brian just said, okay, well, I'm going to make an executive decision. This is how it's going to read.
Yeah.
But,
and he was usually right.
Well,
not always.
Yeah, usually.
For me, when you're a writer, of course, you read a lot, but you read other people's stories, and you look for their story structure, and you look for how they describe things and so on and so forth. But it's always their story. It's not your story. If you write with 4 other people, you really learn how those other people approach writing the same thing you're trying to write. Yes, you're writing your own character, but it's a common storyline. And I learned a lot about, for that reason, I learned a lot about story design just from watching the other people handle the story.
I just wanted to add on to what Chris said about the uncertainty of what we were doing. And most of you in this room are old enough to remember Photo Play magazine. Come on, nod your heads, come on. It used to be, it was like Today, or like People, only old, about the movie industry. But they did a couple of things back then where they would take the most beautiful eyes and the most beautiful nose and the most beautiful hair, and they'd put them all together in one face, and it would always end up looking like something Picasso painted, and literally I thought when we started this thing, this is what we're going to do. We're going to end up with a Picasso story here. But it didn't turn out that way. It was amazingly, I think it's an amazingly good book. And at least David Bruns agrees with me.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for this encore presentation for Minnesota Mystery Night.
Our thanks to Louis DeMars, the sound engineer who captured the conversation in the first place, and to Lucky's 13 in Mendota for hosting the event.
We also want to thank the sponsors who help keep the mystery alive: Midwest Mystery Works, Twin City Sisters in Crime, and Once Upon a Crime Bookstore.
And if you'd like more Minnesota Mystery Night, it lives on as Masters of Mystery Radio Hour, airing on stations across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and South Dakota. Check your local station, and if Masters of Mystery is not on their schedule, reach out and ask them to add it.
For the current schedule, reservations, and all the latest details, head to mnmysterynight.com.
If you like this podcast, check out the full network of podcasts Bell Cow has to offer at bellcowproductions.com.
In addition to Mystery Conversations, we have Story Lab, Field Notes, the Author Roundup, and who knows what else we'll cook up.
Thanks for listening. Keep following the clues.
And while you're following the bell cow back to the barn, try not to step in anything.